Hello, hello, Betty Babes and Bows. Welcome to episode 13 of the official Betty Page podcast. Here with my co-host Mark Mori and producer Ben. Hey guys.
Hey Tori.
Hey Tori.
Today we have a special guest, Jane Garrett. She's the author of a new book called John Willie, A Bizarre Life.
And it's a really cool book, and it's a really interesting conversation with her because Betty fans will find great interest in the story of John Willie. There's a lot of parallels.
And John Willie was involved with Irving and Paula Claw, Betty's big photographers, and he's involved with the fetish gear and fetish photography and the Sweet Gwendolyn comic strip and all of that. So it's all ties in with Betty.
Yeah,
that's right. He was definitely a pioneer, just like Betty was.
And on with the show.
Hello, Betty fans, and welcome to the new year and a new episode of the official Betty Page podcast. I'm producer Ben, and I'm here with hosts Mark Mori and Tori Rodriguez. Mark and Tori, it's good to see you again.
Always great to see you, Ben.
The gang's back together. Today, we are joined by author Jane Garrett, who just had a book published that I believe all Betty fans will have some special interest in. The book is about John Willie, who was an artist, photographer, cartoonist, and publisher, among many other things. And some say that he was a pioneer and trailblazer whose work helped usher in the sexual revolution of the 60s, just like Betty. The book is called John Willie, A Bizarre Life, and it is out now through Schiffer Publishing. I have it right here, and let me tell you, it's the kind of book you'll want to leave out on your coffee table, that's for sure. Jane, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you very much. Here's the book right here. It is, like I said, quite the cover. I believe that is the cover.
I love that.
That's the cover of one of the bizarre issues of his publication. We'll get to that soon enough. But for those listeners who might not be too familiar with John Willie, Jane, will you give us just a little brief rundown of who he was and why Betty fans might be interested in him?
So yeah, as you mentioned, Ben, John Willie was a bondage and fetish artist. He was a photographer, a writer, a publisher, also a comics artist. So he was a man who wore many hats. Nowadays, he is best remembered for his magazine Bizarre, which was a pioneering bondage and fetish magazine, debuted in 1947, and continued to be published intermittently for the next 10 years under his editorialship, and then for a year or two after that under different management. But John Willie is really the one who, a real pioneer in bondage and fetish style in the United States. Sort of like Betty, he really brought a lot of even kind of how people dress today, fetish wear. A lot of that was inspired by John Willie's work. I would say that he elevated fetish art into a new level of sophistication in the United States.
So I imagine a topic like John Willie, I didn't know a whole bunch about him before I got your book. I just kind of stumbled upon your book, actually. It didn't seem like there's a whole lot of information out there really about him. Like you can look him up on the internet, you can find some few things here and there, but I imagine researching a book like this was pretty difficult. How was the research process?
It was complex. I've been a fan of John Willie since I was a teenager. So, and particularly back then, there was really not much biographical information out there at all. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is that, of course, he was working clandestinely in this sort of, it's not an illegal field. He wasn't doing anything illegal. But certainly it was sort of borderline material. I mean, much in the way that Betty's modeling for Irving Klaw was, right? So there's that to consider. And then also he lived all over the world. He was born in Singapore. He grew up in the UK. He lived in Australia for about 20 years, and then he came to the United States. So really his path took him all over the world, and that also complicates research into his background. So when I first started this research, there was a lot of information out there that was conflicting. There are some people that have done some great research in the past. And so there was a starting point at the very least. But I really started to do my research in earnest in late 2015. I was working in an archival repository in Chicago. My background is as a librarian and archivist. So living there in Chicago, I was fortunate to be very near the Kinsey Institute, which is at Indiana University. And the Kinsey Institute is just an incredible wealth of information. It's the premier archives in the United States for anything related to the history of sexuality. They also do a lot of scientific research into human sexuality. But for my purposes, it was really their historical archives that were really useful. They have some of John Willie's original artwork. They also conducted an interview or two with him before he passed. So there was a lot of meat there to work with, and that kind of really jump-started my research. And then from there, I did a lot of research in other archives around the world. Unfortunately, I don't have the kind of money to really actually be able to travel all over the world to every place that I want to go and do research, but I was able to work with other archivists around the world, be in communication with them, have them scan materials for me or clarify information. And then, so that was a great starting point as well. In addition to that, of course, not everything in this subject area is going to be found in academic archives. So I collected a lot of old magazines and things like that, which is a lot of fun. And this was the type of material I was already collecting for fun. So that kind of gave me an excuse to add to that. And so I have a lot of materials from John Willie's time, as well as a lot of bondage magazines from the 60s and 70s and 80s, where they started kind of looking at John Willie retrospectively. And, fans and original readers of Bazaar were writing in and telling their stories. So there's, and then a lot of his material is also held in private collections. So there were a lot of opportunities to approach this from different directions. And anytime I felt like I was starting to hit a dead end, it seemed like suddenly I'd find something new that would just blow it up and keep me moving forward.
Very cool. You were talking about collecting John Willie stuff. I know it's probably a lot harder today than it was, say, 20 years ago. Like everything, it seems like it's just getting tougher to find original materials. Even the old issues of Bazaar, they pop up on eBay and they're ridiculous amounts of money. But how long have you been collecting John Willie, and when did your fascination with him start?
It actually started when I was in high school, was when I first learned about him. One of my friends had gone to Germany to visit some of her family members there, and she came back with, I don't know if you've seen the Taschen reprint of, it's called The Complete Bazaar. It came out in, I think, 1995 or something like that. And that was they reproduced all the old issues of Bazaar, page by page. And she brought this back from Germany, and I thought, what is this? We're looking through it, and I just thought, wow, I can't believe this was made in the 1940s and 50s. Not only just the bondage content and the great fashions, the incredible shoes and boots and things like that, but also some kind of things that you don't really associate with that time. He would write about tattooing and facial piercings, and there's one great drawing he did where they say, nose rings are in style for 54, and there's a drawing of a woman with a septum piercing, and it's just really, really cool stuff. And so I thought, whoever this is, I've got to know. And that's when I started collecting everything that I could find about him, any books I could find, magazines. Eventually that turned into collecting, the original issues of Bazaar, as well as some photographs. Unfortunately, I don't have any of his original paintings or anything. I don't think that's likely to to become available anytime soon. But that was kind of how it started for me.
I've got a question, Ben. Oh, Jane. I came across John Willie's name in researching my film, Bettie Page Reveals All. And so I would like you to talk about how he interacted with the claws and where Bettie fits into that.
Absolutely. So a lot of people, I think, are erroneously believe that Betty and John Willie had some kind of professional relationship with one another, because certainly they were running in the same circles in New York. But both of them at different periods in their life said that they did not know each other. She stated it, and then separately he stated it as well. So I don't think that they ever actually met. But uh, uh, John Willie was working very closely with Irving Klaw when he moved to New York, um, and he started Bazaar magazine. There was a period of time where Bazaar had to go on hiatus. He couldn't afford to continue to produce it. And during that period, he started working with Irving Klaw. He sold some of his photographs to Irving Klaw. He didn't do photographs in Irving's studio, but Irving did sell John Willie's photography, and also his comic strip, Sweet Gwendolyn, was sold through Cartoon and Model Parade. And there's a little overlap. I mean, John Willie also, he put Bettie on the cover of Bazaar number 14, which I have right here. And one of the kind of cool things about this one is that it's a wraparound cover, so it's a photo of Betty front and back,
Yeah.
which is a little unusual. That wasn't how he normally did Bazaar covers. So I guess this is a pretty evocative photo. So there was definitely overlap between the two, and of course Betty was working with Irving Klaw, and they were in those circles in New York together, but didn't personally work
Well, now
together.
my understanding is that he was showing the Klaws, bringing them or educating them on fetish gear, setting up fetish photographs. Do you know anything about that sort of thing?
Well, I know there was another John, Little John, was his name, who was really kind of teaching the Klaws a lot of how to do bondage ties and things like that.
Maybe I'm getting them mixed up.
Well, I think John Willie was working pretty closely with Klaw for a while, but he kind of started to distance himself from Irving Klaw around 1950, 1951. He kind of started to move away for a number of reasons that I explore in the book. But I think a big part of it was that, John Willie at this point was in his 40s. And a lot of the other artists that worked for Irving Klaw, they were young men in their 20s. I think they were excited to have this work, and they didn't mind contributing artwork to support Irving Klaw's business. But John Willie kind of had his own ideas in mind of what he wanted to do, and I think he clashed a little bit with Irving Klaw at times.
So the photo that's on the cover of Bazaar 14, even though John Willie was a established photographer, he didn't take that picture, did he?
Right, no, he didn't take that photo, exactly.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify that, because that's one thing I was wondering. Is like, did he take that photo? Like, does anybody know who took that photo exactly? Is it just kind of uncredited?
I don't know. It doesn't say in the magazine. I assumed it might have been a Klaw photo, Paula or Irving, but I don't know. I don't actually know. In fact, it doesn't even mention anywhere in the magazine that this is Bettie Page on the cover. I mean, obviously it's her, but
right. I mean, she was a pretty big draw at the time, so that might explain the wraparound photo. Yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder if it's a crop of a larger photo, because the way that it appears there looks kind of different from the other, Klaw photos that we've seen in a way. And Jane, I'm curious too, since we're talking about kind of like the overlap between Willie and Betty. So, I first, heard of John Willie because of, my love for Betty and getting into all of the Betty lore and everything. How and when did you first learn about Betty?
So I learned about Betty. I was in elementary school, and there was a TV show about her. This was right around the time that they, I know in the 80s they were saying she's missing, nobody knows what happened to her, that sort of thing. This was right around the time that she is rediscovered. She's around again. I remember there was an interview with her, in where she was in shadow. You couldn't see her. And everything about this was just so mysterious and exciting to me because, growing up, I loved, glamorous women and old Hollywood, any of that kind of stuff. And so add into that this mystery of what happened to her. It was really, really appealing to me. And I thought she was beautiful. I loved her smile. And so I definitely became a big Bettie fan. Have been all these years. Yeah.
I'm thinking, Jane, I'm thinking the show referring to you might be E! Entertainment did a documentary on Bettie where she was very briefly on camera, but in shadow.
Yeah.
But the first one about Bettie was Robin Leach, Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. That was in the early 90s.
I think this might have been the E one, but
Right. Yes, that sounds like it. Because Bettie was not interviewed on the Robin Leach one.
So I'll share a favorite photo of mine from my collection of claw photos. Here's Bettie. I'm not sure who the other model is, but Bettie Irving and somebody else.
Yeah, somebody will know. One of the fans will know.
Her name is
Mark
Roz.
knows.
Roz. Okay, yes, I've seen her in Cartoon and Model Parade. Yeah, so they're
Yeah, I love that. I think I've seen that picture before, and I think I definitely didn't have anything near as good resolution wise, because I think the ones that are available online are like kind of a little bit fuzzier. I think I shared it one time then and was like, this is talking about giving new meaning to like a balanced diet or something like that. She's like balancing that donut on her knee or something.
I love that picture. Some of my favorite pictures of Bettie, my personal faves, are the more casual ones where she's not actually posing for the camera. They just caught her in a moment, just hanging out. I love pictures like that. And that one right there is a keeper. That's great.
Yeah. Shows, you always see her personality, but like you say, when it's kind of just a casual, almost snapshot type, it's really fun.
And it seems like the majority of her candids are like, she's being super silly.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Which is cute.
And pictures like that are also a testament to just how photogenic she was, because I'm telling you right now, if I was hanging out with friends drinking a Coca-Cola and they took a picture of me from the side, I would have like 4 chins, bags under my eyes, like I would look terrible. So she looks good in every picture, and I love that.
Yeah, especially when you're chewing, not how you normally want to be photographed.
I take the worst casual pictures of all time, like back in the day when social media was new, like Facebook, MySpace, and people would upload all these party pictures, I would be like, no, take them down right now. This be a picture of me like in the background looking like a creeper. But Bettie looks so good in every picture, and that's a true testament right there. I love it.
Yes. She really does. I know you're not going to see it. There's not like a candid picture of her where it's like, oh, they didn't get her at they didn't catch her right angle there.
And so we're pretty much established that John Willie and Bettie did not work together. I believe Bettie's credit was saying she didn't really think she worked with him. He said he didn't work with her. But I think it's really interesting that they both had a pretty significant resurgence in pop culture at about the same time, the mid to late 70s, but then again in the 80s. The Taschen book about John Willie came out. Of course, the first real big book about Bettie Page came out. What was it about the 90s? And was it people? I think people maybe were realizing how significant their contributions were to fashion, to sexual awakening. I mean, what do you think about all that? But the 90s were a pretty wild time, weren't they?
Yeah, I think part of that is, I feel like once about 50 years have passed, people really start to look back and think about things in a new way. I mean, I know when I was young, the 70s were kind of seen as, oh, that's so weird and goofy and disco and all this stuff. And now that the 70s were 50 years ago, a lot of folks, including myself, are kind of reevaluating a lot of that stuff and saying, actually, that was cool. That was special and that was significant, and here's why. And so I think that was part of it, I think, was just the distance of time. But also I think a lot of people had experiences like myself where they saw this and they said, I can't believe, here we are in the 90s and we think we're so hip and all of that. And to realize that all of this was going on, and certainly it had been going on since before the 1940s and 50s too, but to see something from that era, which is typically associated with something like Leave It to Beaver, and to see that there's this edgy or sexy material being produced as well was kind of surprising for a lot of people, I think.
That's the thing with me when I first really discovered Bettie and finally realized exactly when those pictures were taken and how that iconic look was from the 50s. It blew my teenage mind. I was like, she can't be from the 50s. She looks like she's from 10 years ago, because it was so relevant and so, just to the current style that I was seeing everywhere. I want to go ahead and address the movie, the biopic about Bettie Page, the Notorious Bettie Page, that has the scene with Bettie and John Willie in it. Let's go ahead and tear this apart because we know it didn't really happen. We know everybody says they never worked together, but what is your take on that scene with, what was his name? Jared Harris playing John Willie, tying Bettie up, kind of ridiculing her, talking to her. What do you think about that?
Well, I'll first of all, I'll say that I enjoyed The Notorious Bettie Page. I saw it in the theater when it came out, and then I watched it again when I was writing the book, just to kind of jog my memory. And both times I was frustrated with John Willie's the characterization of John Willie, especially when I was writing the book, because I kind of had a gut feeling that it was wrong back in the early 2000s. But then the second time I watched it, then I knew it was wrong. Because first of all, as you say, the idea that there was a photo shoot at all is a complete fiction. That didn't happen. I wish it had happened. I'd love to see those photos, but it never happened. But also, they made him out to be this kind of creepy drunk, being really weird to his models. I really have never read anything from any of his models or really anybody who knew him that says that he acted that way. And in fact, I've read correspondence that he wrote privately to, even some advice that he wrote to younger photographers. And he said, what you don't want to do is you don't want to be inappropriate to your models. If your model is interested in having more than a professional relationship with you, she'll let you know. He wrote this in the early 1950s. In Bazaar, he was always pushing this idea of sexual activities being healthy and normal, provided that that the activities are consensual and everybody's having a good time. I don't think that a lot of people even broached the subject of consent. I certainly don't see that in old pinup magazines or other older sex-based materials. In fact, you don't really see that until fairly recently. So he was really very progressive for his time. His models, there were a number of models that worked for him again and again. And I don't think that would have happened had he been creepy and inappropriate. I will say that he did have a drinking problem. A lot of people recognize that. And so that was something that came up in the movie. But also there's that part with the photo shoot where he says something about, what would Jesus think of your bondage modeling? And that just really made me mad. And I know that would have infuriated him because he was always railing against, Christianity and saying, oh, this is the scourge of the earth. And this is, why we have all this sexual repression now. So he never, ever would have said something like that. No.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, don't get me wrong. I like Jared Harris. He's a great actor, but yeah, after reading your book, especially, and thinking about that scene, because when I saw the movie originally, I didn't really know much about him. And then after reading your book and seeing it, I realized, yeah, they took some serious liberties with it.
Yeah, and it's too bad because I feel like already there's, you would expect him to, typically if you think about a man being a bondage photographer in the 1950s, that you do, it does call to mind maybe a certain idea that is not quite accurate.
It is really interesting too, just to note that like the people who are more into like fetish stuff or things that would be considered like sexually radical have been and are the ones that are typically having the conversations and starting the conversations around consent and what, and rules and how to make things respectful and even thinking about it in the first place. And so like when you were saying people weren't really broaching the topic of consent back then, I don't think a lot of people were even thinking about it.
That's a really great point. It's, it's more important than ever if you're playing with power dynamics, or if you're doing something where somebody is immobilized. It becomes more important than ever. So yeah, being kind of having that discussion through that community, I agree with you.
Yeah.
So Jane, I'd like to hear some more particulars about John Willie. I mean, he's a photographer, he's a magazine publisher, he's promoting fetish dressing. Could you talk a little bit more about the particulars of him?
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, he was very interested in, well, bondage was really his thing, but also he was. I mean, if you look at his artwork, he drew costumes beautifully. He was very into fashion, as you say, especially corsetry, high heels, stockings, beautiful lingerie. He also was interested in cross-dressing, and so he would also do fashion illustrations of, here's some clothes that men can wear, and he was very open about the fact that, he felt that clothing should not be gendered. Well, I think he liked women to wear women's clothing, right? But he felt that men should be free to wear that clothing too if they want to, and he was very open about that. Another thing that really appeals to me about John Willie, a lot of people look to Bazaar now and look at the aesthetics of the magazine and look at the imagery. But if you read through the letters and you read his writing in the magazine, you see too that what he was trying to do with Bazaar was create a community for people. Let people know, hey, you're not alone. This isn't weird. A lot of us like this. Whatever you like, you can find other people that like it too. And then, you can find yourself a partner who likes the same things as you. Don't give up. Very encouraging to people. So it was really it wasn't just about the artwork for him. And it certainly wasn't just about making money, as we see with somebody like Irving Klaw, who was not a fetishist himself and didn't really care about this stuff beyond the commercial motivation.
So in his promotion and of the fetish wear and the bondage and stuff like that, in the mid-50s it was a bad time to be involved with that because of the Kefauver subcommittee. What do you think was going through his mind when he was seeing in the news and on like live broadcasts that they were cracking down on stuff like that? Was he as worried about it as like the Irving Claws, you think, or was he right in the crosshairs of that?
I think he was very worried about it. He was not called to testify there, which was, I think, a massive relief for him. But certainly a lot of his friends were. Irving Klaw was. I know Bettie was called, but I believe didn't have to provide any testimony. But I think he was really worried about it. I think that was one of the things that actually led him to abandon Bazaar and finally decide he didn't want to publish that magazine anymore.
Did he take a hiatus from it during the hot period? Was it 55? Was it 55? 54?
He was still publishing during that time, but it was never actually a monthly publication. He kind of released it whenever he could, whenever he had the money and the materials to publish. So he was definitely still publishing through that time, but that was when things really started to slow down. Additionally, one of the things that I talk about in the book was that there was a magazine that published an expose about Bazaar. It was called Behind the Scene, and they just wrote this terrible article. And actually, you can see here, there's Bettie.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Even though she has nothing to do with Bazaar, there's oh, you can't print that in a magazine. And then my favorite part about this is the caption under Bettie's picture. It says, "Sultry Bettie Page is a favorite pinup in magazines appealing to fetishists and perverts." So extreme. And I think that's when he really started to think, oh my gosh, this is getting hot. This is getting out of hand.
Yeah.
So
I've always, when I think about that whole era of when all these people were getting called to testify. I've always been really sympathetic towards Bettie, just what she was probably going through. I was wondering, Mark, that when you in all the interviews you did with Bettie, when she would talk about that, could you tell it was making her uncomfortable still to the day when you were interviewing her?
Oh yeah, she
'cause
would
it must have
she would get pissed off about it when she would talk about it. I mean,
it must have
because
been incredibly stressful. I just can't imagine the mental what it would do to you mentally and physically. You know,
well,
a lot of people say, "Oh, go ahead, Mark."
it contributed to her deciding to retire from modeling.
Mm-hmm.
And Claw, it affected Claw too, obviously. And
Mm-hmm.
so it was a difficult situation. And of course, it's not very different than some things today. I mean, it was politicians. Kefauver was trying to run for president, and it was just political fodder for him. He thought he could, oh, I'll appeal to middle America or whatever that is, you know, and because I want to be president, so I'm going to flog this issue. And the whole issue was made up, you know, because there was this kid that died from auto asphyxiation, and they blamed it on a Bettie bondage photograph that Irving Klaw had taken, right? So it was all concocted political crap, really.
Can't believe they would do that.
It was legal. There was nothing illegal going on. And so to be able to vilify people for something that is not even a crime is pretty terrifying.
And Ben, yeah, I like your point about, I mean, just to even think about, like, we hear about it this much later, and it's like, you know, you can imagine it was stressful, but if you really even just take a couple minutes to truly try to imagine just how, like, truly traumatic that would have been. And I mean, like, each of the three people we're talking about here, and we don't know for sure if you know how much of an impact it had on John Willie, but like, if it did, you know, lead to him like abandoning his magazine, and obviously led to Bettie abandoning her career, led to Irving Klaw abandoning his, and supposedly contributing to his early death. And so it's like they had to like abandon like their primary creative passions. And it's just like that in itself is such a tragedy.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't imagine the stress. I mean, I get nervous if I'm sitting at home and I get a phone call from like an out-of-state phone number. Like I'm like, I'm like, who is that and what do they want? So I couldn't imagine, especially in the 50s after, you know, after the whole where they start with the Red Scare, the communist scare, and like this all what happened to all those people. So I just can't imagine.
Well, that was going on at exactly the same time.
Was it about the same time? Yeah. No, I wouldn't have handled it very well. How much longer did Bazaar continue to be published after all of that happened with the Kefauver subcommittee and all?
Well, John Willie left the Bazaar in 1957. And then, boy, I should have this right on the tip of my tongue. It was either 1 year or 2 years after that it continued for just a few more issues. And then it folded. I think without him at the helm, I mean, you really see with those later issues, the quality went downhill. Everything really kind of fell apart. He was Bazaar, you know, and it was his vision from the very beginning. And I think also the readers, you know, there are some letters from readers in later issues where they're saying, I noticed something's changed, but I don't know what it is, but something just is not as good as it used to be. Well, that's what it was.
Well, 1957 was the same year Bettie retired from modeling.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. So who took? You may have mentioned this. Who took over when he left Bazaar?
Yeah. It was a colleague of his and his former secretary. They were kind of working together as a team to continue to produce it, but I don't think either of them. I don't even know if they really had an interest in the material. Really, it kind of doesn't feel like it when you look at the direction the magazines go.
Yeah.
And so that the magazine you showed us, that behind the scene magazine that pretty much called him out. It mentioned Bazaar, right?
Yes, it mentioned Bazaar by name. It mentioned Sweet Gwendolyn, which was his comic.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet Gwendolyn was published in Bazaar, but it was also published in some of the mainstream print magazines.
Yeah, so that must have really freaked him out because I imagine that was a probably fairly well circulated magazine. Now, wasn't he also experiencing some stress issues with postal inspections or like, you know, the mailing of the materials?
Yeah, that was something he was always concerned about, and he managed to, I don't want to say evade, but he managed to avoid a lot of complications with the postal inspectors for a long time, longer than a lot of other folks did, but they did eventually catch up with him, yeah.
Well, and it's hard for young people today to understand this postal inspection business. In those days, there was no internet. You would just mail stuff through the mail. That was basically how stuff got circulated. And the post office had this big thing where they would inspect the mail, and that's how they came after Irving Klaw. And they were basically some of the main censors, the way you hear about some of the internet being censored today.
Yeah, such control over things. It's really startling how much power the postmaster general held and the postal inspectors. Far more than I realized before I started this research.
Yeah, they were some of the key enforcers of, against sexual material.
Yeah, and some of them really seemed pretty mad with power. Like they were really proud of what they were doing.
I mean, this is why you had the camera clubs, because you could take photographs of models scantily clad or nude, but you couldn't send them through the mail. That was illegal.
So they would open up and inspect, and
right.
If they found the materials, I mean, does anybody know what would happen? Like, was it just like a...
Well, I think Klaw got communications from the Postal Service threatening him.
Okay. Yep.
Well,
not something you want to get.
One thing I know that they would do to some of the magazines is that they would take away your second-class mailing, which allowed you to mail these magazines at a reasonable price. So if that's taken away from you, suddenly you're going to have to pay a much higher rate to mail your magazine, and that effectively puts you out of business. And that was
wow.
They wanted to put you out of business.
And this is why there's no men in these fetish photographs with Bettie, because they're trying to steer clear of being accused of pornography.
Yeah. But that is interesting, Mark, that a lot of young people today would be thinking like, well, who gives a shit about the Postal Service? Like, what does that matter? And it's like, that was it. That was the only thing, the only way to get things around, like you said.
Yeah.
Well, it's very relevant to where I live right now, because on January 1st of just a few days ago, there was supposed to be an internet adult material ban go into effect, to where you can't go to some of those naughty websites without uploading a picture of your driver's license and taking a picture of your face. But then I guess a federal judge temporarily blocked it. But it is interesting how history repeats of how it's constantly, they'll give it, then they restrict it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, there's like, everybody says the same old tired thing. It's like, we've lived through the Wild West of the internet, and now they're going to slowly take it away. And they are. The internet is nothing like it used to be. That's not breaking news to anybody. You get on there, you search for anything. You search for John Willie. Maybe 5-10 years ago, you probably would have got a wealth of information compared to today. I feel like things are just being throttled at an enormous rate, and it's only a matter of time before they come for the Reddits of the world and stuff like that, and you have to have your driver's license associated with that.
Well, and also like the 50s, and this is more related to the Red Scare kind of stuff, there's a lot of political stuff on the internet being censored.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's amazing how relevant John Willie and Bettie's story is to today. It's pretty fascinating stuff for sure. Jane, did you work on this book independently, researching it? You said you started in 2015, I believe.
Yes.
What was the process like of getting this book out there? How was it? How did you find a publisher? How did that work out?
Well, I was, at first I was a little bit nervous as I was writing the book, because, I wasn't sure if it was going to come together. I wasn't sure if I'd even find enough information to flesh out a full biography. But luckily, over the years, I found so much material, and I was finding more and more interesting, just things that I'd never expected to find. So once I got to the point where I thought, okay, this is happening, this is working. I started looking for a publisher, and the reason I selected Schiffer is because I knew that they already published some material in this sort of vein. They had published some books by Bunny Yeager, books of her photography before she died, and things like that. They've published some old burlesque books and pinup books, things like that. So I thought there might be some interest there, and thankfully there was. I just kind of followed their submission guidelines, and I actually thought, okay, that's going to be, my first stop, and then I'll be, walking through the wilderness trying to find somebody to take this book. But Schiffer was really interested right away, and I'm really, really glad about it because they have just a fantastic design team. They did all kinds of little details that I think John Willie would really, really like. Some fun little extras that really make the book a pretty package in addition to having great information. So
definitely. Yeah. And like I said earlier, it's a really pretty book. Like it's a book you want to leave out on your table. You want to have it on your coffee table. And I will say this, I don't know if any reviews have pointed this out, but it looks just as cool with the dust cover off than because the actual hardback has that really cool. Hang on, let me get my copy. I got to show this. I've always liked books that when you take the dust cover off, because I always take the dust cover off to read the book. And when I took it off, I saw this amazing, look at this.
Oh, that's so cool. I love that.
Yeah, I was so happy when that's what I mean by their.
I love that. Yeah.
Like just ideas, and I just thought, yes, I love it, and I think John Willie would love it. So.
That is really cool.
Thank you.
So you you lucked out with your first stop on the publishing circuit, basically.
Yeah,
that's amazing. Yeah, that's great.
Tori, when you did your Bettie Page The Lost Years, did you do it independently at first and just do all the research and then get it put out, or did you have somebody on board?
I actually had a publisher had reached out to, or an agent actually had reached out to me after I interviewed one of her clients who is a pretty well-known yoga instructor. And I just for fun had interviewed her and published the interview on Bettie Page Fitness website. And her agent emailed me and was like, have you ever thought about writing a book? I really loved that interview you did with my client. And I was like, actually, yes. And so I told her I had just recently hooked up with Ron Brim, who Jane is Bettie's nephew. I was about to say Bettie's aunt. So Bettie's his aunt. And he had wanted to write a book about Bettie and do something with all those archival materials he had. And so we just went from there, and we had to go. She helped me pitch a few publishers, and then we finally found one on about the third or fourth try.
Great.
But yeah.
I've seen some of Ron Brem's. That's his name, right? Ron Brem, is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen some of Ron Brem's photos that he shared online of Bettie and Goldie. It's just
yes.
Oh my gosh, it's so cool to see those really early pictures of them kind of playing around and modeling together. It's really
I know, I love those too. Those are kind of, and they have kind of a more of a candid feel because it seems like they must have been taken by a family friend or something that's not known who took those photos on Coney Island beach. But yeah, I think those are the ones you're talking about because they're just super sweet and kind of casual and just you can tell that see the affection between Bettie and Goldie. It's so cute. Yeah.
I'd like to talk a little bit too about John Willie's legacy. He obviously inspired some other artists who the Bettyverse might know pretty well, like Eric Stanton, Gene Bilbrew. What you told a pretty interesting story in your book about was it Eric Stanton that was hired to touch up some of John Willie's original art for future publications? Is that true?
Yes. So John Willie at one point, he had his comic strip, Sweet Gwendolyn, which was quite popular, early bondage comic strip. Like I said, that also appeared in some of the pinup magazines, including some of the, I think you all are probably familiar with the Harrison magazines, Wink and Titter, and, Bettie was in some of those.
Right.
But Sweet Gwendolyn, appeared in the pinup magazines as well, in addition to Bizarre. And then I think there was sort of a demand from fans that they wanted a little stiffer Sweet Gwendolyn content. They wanted to see a little more nudity and that kind of thing. And so John Willie said that he put this out because he really needed the money. He knew people wanted it, so he put out this Sweet Gwendolyn comic that contained some nudity. It could only be sold. He sold it only, on his mailing list to people that he already knew and had worked with in the past, because he knew that if he sent this stuff through the mail, they were going to have that postal inspector issue that we were talking about earlier. So he did that, and then he said, I want to, it's absolutely beautiful, beautiful work. But he, I think, felt I got to get this off my hands because it's too hot. It's going to get me in trouble. So he sells it to Irving Klaw. And then, yes, Eric Stanton, Klaw immediately realized, well, we can't have this nudity. I can't sell this as is. So Stanton was hired to go in and paint over it, paint lingerie on the bodies and, make some changes to make it a little more palatable. And yeah, Eric Stanton, from everything that I've read, was really not happy about having to do that, but he was also a contract artist for Irving Klaw. So that was what he was hired to do, and he did it, which is, it's quite a loss. But you can still find the uncensored versions floating around sometimes, so we do know what they look like. It just, the originals, unfortunately, were painted over.
What title do you think John Willie would be most proud to be? This is kind of a tricky question, but what title do you think he'd be most proud to be associated with? A cartoonist, fashion icon of sorts, a photographer, publisher? What do you think he was most proud of?
Well, I know his favorite project was Sweet Gwendolyn, so I think he would be really proud to be associated with that. Certainly artist. I know he didn't really think much of his own photography, even though I love his photography. But from his perspective, his photography was really just something that he did so that he could draw from it, and also he could sell them and make money off of the photos as well. But I think he didn't think much of his own photography, but certainly he knew he was a good artist, and his artwork is so beautiful. It's sophisticated. It's it's stylish. It looks cool, and like to this very day, it looks fresh. I think that's why people still use it to this day in all sorts of applications. You'll see it on people's T-shirts, or people post it online all over the place. So I think definitely artist is what he'd be proudest of.
And he ended up dying relatively young, unfortunately. Was it a brain tumor?
Yes.
I believe. Yeah.
Very close to the time when Irving Klaw died.
Yeah, very close. Yeah, exactly. Very close. And it kind of makes you wonder if that, maybe that was a result of some of that crazy stress from the mid-50s. That really has had an impact on people. And I would like to see some books explore that more in the future. I would love to see a book just on there might be one about the Kefauver subcommittee and like the victims of it, like who took the most toll from it. Like, and then I believe it would be Irving Klaw or Bettie. I think it really.
There were two Kefauver subcommittees. The first one he did went after comic books.
Comics.
Mm-hmm, right.
Yes. And actually Mad Magazine came out of that because some of the suppressed comic books were by the creators of Mad Magazine. And then the year following that, it went after the porn, so to speak.
Well, and I find that interesting too. I mean, I've thought about that with John Willie. It's like, okay, he's a comics artist, and they're coming after comics. Okay, that's of concern. And then they're coming after bondage material, and that's his other side. I feel like he must have thought, God, I really can't win here.
Yeah.
Can't catch a break.
Right.
But yeah, that would be interesting, Ben, to see like some sort of, who knows, like if anybody would have any interest in funding something like that at this point, but like that would be interesting to know like what the full effect of a lot of that the various forms of oppression and suppression were at that time. Because we do have research showing like negative impacts of even just like, I'd say even just, but like emotional suppression, even not being, able to express how you feel, essentially. And so I can imagine like just creative suppression and everything that goes into that and the overlap with the emotional suppression and everything else. Yeah, that's interesting to think about all those implications.
It makes the was it the 80s that was it Tipper Gore that really cracked down on obscene music lyrics?
Mm-hmm.
It makes that look super tame. Like those people,
Yeah,
they were like, we're
right.
being
I
oppressed.
know.
We're being, like you had like, oh gosh, who was it? Dee Snider from Twisted Sister testifying and stuff. But it's like, that's child's play compared to what these people went through in the 50s,
Well, it was
for
the
sure.
last gasp of that stuff from the 50s, maybe.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, same flavor, but a little weaker.
Mm-hmm.
I love Dee Snider's testimony, by the way. I always thought he did a great job.
Yeah, I need to go watch it again. I don't remember. That
Mm-hmm.
was like my scene at the time, so it was like I was really enraged about it all.
I remember when that went down. I was in, I believe I was in middle school, and we all had TVs in the classrooms, and there was like a morning news program that would come on. I believe it was called like Channel One or something.
Right.
And they did a report on that, and it showed Dee Snider's testimony. And as soon as it cut off, everybody in the classroom cheered, and the teacher got really mad because I grew up in super country Tennessee town, small town, so we all got in trouble.
That's a cool memory.
It was
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jane, how does it feel now that this book has come out and it's made such a splash, and I've been seeing it all over social media? It's getting great reviews. How does it feel now to be part of John Willie's legacy? Because believe it or not, you are.
That's amazing. I never thought of that way. That's
Yeah.
really, yeah, it's amazing. Well, I mean, I will say since it came out, I've been hearing from all kinds of people. I've been getting really good feedback, which feels really good. I've been meeting all kinds of interesting people, including some people that I've been fans of for so much of my life, and so to hear positive feedback from some of these folks saying, "Oh, I didn't." I've been a John Willie fan for 50 years, and I didn't know this information. It feels really, really good, and I feel just happy that I've been such a fan of John Willie for so many years. He's had such an influence on my style and my interests, and helped me to find other things. And so it kind of feels like my opportunity to, in some way, say thank you to him too. I wish I could have met. Would have been really cool, but yeah, to get to be, like you say, part of his legacy is really special.
Well, it looks like a beautiful tribute, and I can't wait to read it. I definitely will.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
It's very cool. And you can get it, obviously, at all the major retailers. But of course, I would like to encourage everyone to buy it from their local mom and pop bookstore. It can be ordered very easily, I'm sure.
Yes, yeah, it's available through major distributors. So certainly any of your local bookstores can order it. Yeah, if they don't have
awesome.
Does anybody else have any other?
Yeah, before we sign off, if you don't mind, I'd like to plug my new film.
Oh, for sure.
Especially since a lot of people are aware Starbucks workers just had this strike all over the country.
Yeah.
Very, very relevant. I've been seeing it all over the news.
Right. So my film is The Baristas versus the Billionaires. It's about the Starbucks union drive, tracing it from a single store in Buffalo, New York, to now it's mushroomed to over 525 stores, 12,000 members in the union now.
Wow.
And they're still fighting for their contract. So the Baristas versus the Billionaires, it's the story of Starbucks. And these are young people. There's a 19-year-old woman who stands up to the head of Starbucks, Howard Schultz, in a meeting where he's trying to talk people out of voting for the union. So it's really, I think it's going to be a good film. Watch for it this spring and this summer. And the website is baristasversusbillionaires.com. baristasvsbillionaires.com.
Can't wait to see that.
Yeah.
I'm super excited. Like I mentioned to Mark earlier, I was listening to a podcast that Alec Baldwin was hosting, and he was interviewing the person that stood up to Howard Schultz.
Yeah.
Very, very interesting, very relevant on so many levels right now. Treatment of workers in the U.S. It's, billionaires aren't very popular dudes right now.
Well, it's the whole wealth gap thing. I mean, the wealth getting concentrated in fewer and fewer hands, and average people can't even afford their groceries.
That's right.
right?
You do you did doing the good work with this documentary, and I know it's going to be
Oh
a
yeah.
splash. And it is coming out this year.
Yes, it's coming out. I mean, we're just putting the finishing touches on it now. It'll be at film festivals this spring and this summer.
I can't wait.
So you've been just a little bit busy
Yeah.
lately.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Jane, thank you so much for joining us. And Mark and Tori, thanks for this is the first one I've taken the lead on. I feel like because I read the book and I came to Mark and Tori and I was like, we've got to get Jane Garrett on. This book's amazing. Bettie fans will love it. I'd like to encourage all the Bettie fans out there to pick it up if you haven't already. It's easy to get a hold of. Yeah, thank you so much, Jane. It's a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you,
Such
Jane.
a pleasure,
Appreciate it.
Jane. Thank
Yes,
you.
thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
It was
All right,
fun.
bye-bye.